and based on consensus that I think both of you might use the word bahasa better than me. The second thing today, we will review a little bit about security concepts, not just security concepts based on the government itself, but based on very kind of security concepts. So we will highlight two kind of security concepts. It is based on non-traditional threat, or you might say so as non-traditional securities and human securities. But as we try to improve the idea of people in these regions, that we still confront with the word insecurity. We are not secure. So how can we make our societies in every nation secure? So that will be the discussions of today as well. And why ASEAN Way can be linked, that also will be discussed. And lastly, it's about conclusions. So I would use the time in this meeting for about 1 hour. Okay, so let's focus on the first one. It's about ASEAN Way. So I think everybody knows about what is ASEAN Way because it comes from the idea of forming the regional organizations during the threat of the communism threat, especially after the Cold War. And ASEAN nation states also try to come up with how to bring stabilities to these regions. And we have 5 founding countries. I think you have known that already. So in 1967, after EU has found itself in 1957, we also have our own regional organization for the first time. If we don't think about the previous one, this is more effective. So it is recognized to be one of the most successful regional international organizations in handling many issues in ASEAN. In that time, in the first era, we focused a lot on security issues based on the war, based on, you know, all the kind of thing that can make us feel that we are invaded again in second round after the colonizations. So the first priority of ASEAN during that time is only based on peace, stabilities, and to stop conflict and violence in the regions. So in the world of academics, there are 2 streams of people who study in Southeast Asia. The first streams focus that Southeast Asia's and ASEAN's, ASEAN is the way out that can solve many problems. And I think it has come out very, very well in terms of organizing and protecting the regions. But on the other hand, mostly from the Western people, Western scholars, they're also seeing that ASEAN is not working quite effectively comparing to the year of establishment for 50 years. So we will also point out this issue later. So in this case, when we talk about ASEANs, the purpose of ASEANs is to maintain stabilities. And how to maintain stabilities? One of the big issue that cannot be denied is ASEAN Way. So in this case, what is ASEAN Way? It's an ASEAN diplomacies. It's a diplomacies that we trying to bring people that we call friends together, but friends must have trust. And we don't use law. We don't use enforcement, but we use friendship and trust to start from that. So from that is the beginning of how we what's so-called institutionalize the ASEANs. And later on, how we institutionalize become more actuals. We can found a lot of material, document, official document of ASEANs, for example, that contain ASEAN Way inside. And they might be found, for example, you know, in the what's so-called the ASEAN Declarations 1967. And the most important thing is in Treaty of Amity and Cooperation in Southeast Asia in 1976, that I think right now, even big country, great power, like the China also signed this declaration with us as well. And also, of course, the Bandung Conference in Indonesia also has some seat, some essence of ASEAN Way there. So now, if we look into detail, the definitions, and of course, how it works. When we say how it works, we look into mechanisms. So it is an informal diplomatic instrument and process for maintaining regional stabilities by providing way in handling problems in the region with peaceful mechanisms. That is the first definitions that I can think of. And I will add up a few more definitions later slide, all right? But then we take a look at mechanism first, how the ASEAN way works. ASEAN way comprise of at least 4 mechanisms, 4 factors. The first one is non-interference principle, or might saying that non-interventions. And another one is non-violence. The third one is self-restraint. And the last one is consensus. If you take a look in this mechanism, it didn't say ASEAN law, it didn't say ASEAN regulations, but it just say way. So when you say way, you can't find the word law here. So that is the first miracle of ASEAN, of these regions. How can you come up or institutionalize something without law and bring people of difference of 10 countries, have different diverse of religions, language, food, cultures, geopolitics, mainland and sea, bring these 10 countries together. It's not easy. So 4 things, 4 mechanism here is the recipes of institutionalized ASEAN for at least 50 years, and it has stand still and protect a lot of invasions from external parties and internal parties, meaning among our ASEAN member nation states. So I think this is the second miracle that we have to give and highlight this as one of the most important of ASEAN way for ASEANs. Now, if you take a look seriously, I bring it together. I try to cook a food, ASEAN way food. In these recipes, we can have 2 recipes of ASEAN way. The first one, this food is called self-restraint with non-violence. All right. The second one is non-interference principle with non-violence. So the first one, member state of ASEAN show no threat to each other with self-restraint principle, even in the presence of conflict among themselves. However, recently, there are some few cases took place since 2008, if I can remember. I think it was a case between Thailand and Cambodia. All right, we will discuss this later as a case studies at the third topics. All right, but the second one, non-interference principle with non-violence. Member states of ASEAN adopt non-interference principle as the way to handle the internal affairs and to prevent domestic conflict or problems to not be internationalized. This is very important word, internationalize. Why internationalize? If you look at Southeast Asian nation culture, or if you look at Western culture, the Asian value and Western value, I think you have heard about these 2 concepts from various scholars, various books. We are totally different. One thing that we have to admit in our regions, our ASEAN citizens, ASEAN culture, ASEAN people, is that we do not like to losing face. I'm not sure. I mean, later, board of professor can discuss this with me. But for Thailand, it's for certain that we do not like to losing face. So if we have conflict, for example, the conflict in Thailand, the political conflict in Thailand between the young generations and the old generations, we haven't admit that there's a conflict. We just admit that we just have admitted that we have conflict in the previous constitution of Thailand. They say that because of the situation right now that we have crisis and political insurgents, the conflict. So that's why we have to come up with the constitutions. That is one thing. That is the first time in the history of Thailand that we recognize that we have conflict. But I don't know other countries, but I'm quite certain that in our regions, losing face is one thing. So how to stop this kind become internationalized? That is one of the factors of losing face. The second factor is that we do not want to repeat the same mistake. Like to institutionalize or people institutionalize or people internationalize their own issues to our region. For example, communist threat, That's why we try to maintain our positions to be very neutral, all right? So take a look at ASEAN Way in these two concepts. Self-restraints, non-interference, and non-violence is the key concepts. But that is not enough. That is just to positioning ourselves to the regional, to the global context. But the most important one, this has come from your language, bahasa, which I think is the way out. This is the way of conflict management, which I will go to the next miracle, why ASEAN Way has something that is miracle without law or legal body organizations. It's come from two words, musyawat and mufakat. I don't know how to pronounce it correctly, but the essence is very, very correct. It's about consultation in consensus. After you have self-restraint, after you have non-interference or non-interventions, you have non-violence. Now it's time to come to the table, to talk, to discuss what needs to be discussed, all right? So if you combine all these things together, it brings stabilities, it brings resilience, it brings growth to ASEAN for at least 50 years. Of course, there is debate later. We will discuss that. ASEAN Way is not just about positive thing, all right? It's also about negative thing as well. And that's why when we talk about negative thing, we will talk at the third topic of today about the challenge of ASEAN Ways. Okay, now, as I mentioned earlier about the ASEAN Way and tech, I put a lot of highlight to the Treaty of Amity and Cooperations in Southeast Asia, especially when you use the word amity and cooperations. This refers to trust. And in peace conflict studies, if we want to make everybody feel that we can be friends, the first elements is about trust. If you don't have trust, you cannot have amity and you cannot look forward to corroborate. For example, we have worked with Gajah Mada for quite some time, for 3 years, almost 3 years, but we hardly know each other. But once we start to do more discussions, start to invite people to talk, exchangeably, now we start to have trust. Now we learn from each other and we respect each other. So that's why the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation in Southeast Asia is very, very important. But why is this important? The first one is about respect. Respect what? Independence, sovereignty. Why? Or even territorial insecurities. Because in our regions, we suffer from the colonization era, and we do not want that to happen again. Although within the regions, that even can't be a case. That's why ASEAN was found based on this issue as well, and especially this treaty. So we do not want anybody to take away our independence anymore, or our sovereignty, or our territorial anymore. That's why in 2008, a case of Cambodia and Thailand erupted. And that was the case that showed for the first time since the ASEAN Way was in store that it has proven to be failed in 2008 because it's exchanging rocket files. It used what's so-called internal affairs, institutionalize each country through medias, through two-country medias, and that's destroyed, undermined the concept of ASEAN Way clearly, because both countries stopped using self-restraint. Both countries stopped using non-interference. Both countries stopped using non-violence. And both countries do not have consensus, although we use a lot of methods. We will go back to that later, to the case studies. The second thing is the right of every state to lead its nation existence free from external interference, subversion of cautions, not just from the US, from the China, but also from us as well. That's come from the first one, mutual respect. And the third one, now you can see something here very clear to what ASEAN has stated: non-interference in the internal affair of one another. The fourth thing, settlement of different or dispute by peaceful means. Once you use the word peaceful means, it refers to non-violence. Again, ASEAN Way is seen here. Reunifications of the threat of use of force, again, non-violent is seen here, self-restraint is seen here, non-interference principle is seen here. And the last one, effective cooperation among themselves. How? With consensus, all right, with consultations. So you can see that all these 6 topics are based on ASEAN ways. So in this case, if we want to give the overall pictures about what is ASEAN Way, it's a process of diplomacies respecting the fundamental importance of amity and cooperations and the principle of sovereignty, equality, and territorial integrities, non-interference, consensus, and unity in diversities. All right. So this is what I think I want to give you the all pictures first to link the ASEAN ways to the ideas of trust and friendship through the text. Another definition that I have think that it's a way, a very good way of ASEAN Way. ASEAN Way is seen as a network of partnership toward network of conflict management. Of course, everybody know about ASEAN Way and for a network partnership, but has we seen it as a conflict management? For me, for 50 years, ASEAN has successfully managed dispute and conflict so far, except the 2008. But ASEAN also try a lot, push a lot of efforts to handle that crisis between Cambodia and Thailand. So when we talk about network partnership, it's a big network of partnership based on friendship more than the legalized European Union model. I don't know, students, scholars, professor here, can you name one, any organizations that have a large number of populations, like more than 650 million people in these regions to other regions that it is not based on legal binding organizations? I don't think I have seen that the only single regional organizations that can handle most countries in 10 countries in Southeast Asian nations with non-legal binding. That is my miracle. That is the ASEAN miracle, I would say. So it is built on relationship of trust again among 10 countries as an informal agreement. Now, this is also the third miracle of ASEAN's network of conflict management. It is a conflict management network that share power and balance power among 10 countries. You might see 50 countries, 54, 56 countries in EU right now using same law, using same constitutions. But it's not wrong for them to use constitution or use law, but it's also not wrong. And they cannot blame us that we are not good enough to maintain our regional organization in our way. The Asian value way doesn't need to be like in the Western value ways. And we can see it now, what happens based on Ukraine crisis, regional crisis, the Eurasia crisis, the global crisis, that law cannot stop anything. Law cannot stop hunger. Law cannot stop the fluctuations of oil and gas price. They cannot stop people killing each other. There is no intervention. There is no R2P. It's just, a real NATO. No action, talk only. Not the real organization called NATO, but the real things that call no action and talk only, right? So just a white paper. Instead of white paper and, a small, not white paper, sorry, tiger papers and ASEAN tigers, although we don't have that much power, but at least we have something that we can discuss, that we can talk, all right? It might take times, but I think it can be another mechanism for conflict management. So I have laid out the first concept that I would like to talk already based on ASEAN Way ideology. This is ideologies. Now we come to the second ideologies, securities. And ASEAN also use this as one of the important essence to build up ASEAN's resource for the security issues. So when we talk about security, of course, we have to focus on security studies. So security studies is the branch of the studies from the international relations. And it's come to be existence as the principle or disciplines during the World War II, pretty much the same time of the international relations. The idea is how to stop the World War to not happen again. So in this case, it tried to stop violence, it tried to study military, it tried to understand war, how to stop war, but the security that time doesn't talk about conflict very much, and especially no peace. The era of peace conflict study come later after the World War II. All right. So this is the first era of security studies. How about the second era? Now, after second era, they start to learn more about the other issues, other things. They try to focus more in terms of data analysis. They try to focus on the role of leaders. They try to focus more on the, thinking of identify and protecting against wide range of threat. Now, I'm not sure who can tell me what is the difference between the word threat and conflict, because most of the time people bring it up together and mix it up. Conflict is something that you have incompatible goal and position and it crash, and that's what is called conflict. But threat something is that you might have conflict or might not have conflict, but threats come anytime without you know. So if you want to study threat, it's mean you try to study a future of things that might happen, and that can be called threat, or anything that already exists. But in this time, the threat hasn't been focused mainly on man-made only, or based on the war, or based on what happened during World War II, World War I, or even Cold War. But we focus on more other factors. It is about natural disasters, the thing that cannot be seen by your own eyes. It's the things that we made it up based on the structure itself, like the inequalities, poverties, many other things that we would discuss again next topics, next subtopics. This is the security studies. Now we come to the security concept. Now, the first era is a method used in operating system that handle the threat from outside of the system to maintain the proper functioning of the system. How to maintain, the city, for example. How to maintain the flood to not happen. This can be seen as threat as well. How to maintain when you have a protester, a young generation protester, how to make them protest in the area that do not undermine other people's rights. That also can be threat for the cities, as well as the state, as well as the nation state, as well as for the regionals, as well as for the global. They also can be seen as the system. And how to protect the system, you must have two things, system and threat. This is two factors. And then we come up with the mechanism to protect the threat to not undermine or destroy the system. So this is the first idea of the security concept in the first era. Everything is based on state interest, or you can be called this thing as the state securities as well. Then we come to the second era. Now the meaning of the concept of the security has been expanded. So it's focused on external based on the old understanding, but it's expand also in the internal based on the concept of human securities. Human is the center of development of securities. All right. So if you see the first era and the second era, if to differentiate, the first era concept focus more on state securities, focus more on state interests. But the second era, they focus more on human security or human interest as the concern, as the main priorities. So how do we know that we have human securities? In 1994, the United Nations Public Development Program under UN that has the assignment, that has responsibility to come up with a plan for every nation state as the member of the United Nations, come up with the concept so-called human securities since 1960s, and it expand more and more. But the most famous one is in 1994 by the UNDP. So UNDP mentioned, I forgot to put the essence of 3 things, and I want students to write it down. The difference between state security and human securities, and especially based on the UNDP Human Security 1994, is based on 3 words. The first words is freedom from fear. Humans should not be fear of anything. They should not fear from any threat. They should not be fear from their own government. And this fear must be eliminated. And they must be empowered to have their own right to show that. So the first one is freedom from fear. All right. The second one is freedom from right. They must have their right since they were born as citizens of that nation state or as part of the communities of the international communities. So they must have right to be in that particular state, right to be access to educations, right to access to hospital, to medical assistance when they need, rights to vote, rights to that, to that, all right? And the last one is about right for dignity. Every nation state must have people who has right of dignity. If you are Indonesians, I'm Thai. Actually, I'm mixed between Thai, Indian, and Myanmar. And I would like to preserve 3 ethnicities in myself. Also under the Thai citizenship, I must have the right to do that. All right. So this is the 3 things that is the highlight or a core concept of human securities. From these 3 concepts, the UNDP break it down into 7 securities that every nation state should protect their citizens. The first one is about economics. Second one is about food. The third one is about health. The fourth one is about environment. The fifth is about communities. The sixth about personals. And the last one is about political. We will discuss this again in sub topics below. Then you have traditional securities. If you see my name of the slide, the title, I didn't say that I want to talk about traditional security because the theme of today is based on non-traditional securities and human security in ASEAN way. But why I put that word traditional securities? Because you will not have the word non-traditional securities without understanding what is traditional securities. Now, what is traditional securities? Traditional securities come first, come before non-traditional securities. So it refers to the threat or hostile action by government or nation state against another government or another nation state to other people in that particular nation states by underline, using force, creating war, take control over the other nation state for their own particular national interests, which the form of security can also be linked with so-called state securities. So in this case, what happened in Ukraine, which we never thought it will happen, or even in, in 2006 in Crimea, that can be seen and can be called as traditional securities. Traditional meaning a very old way. The old way to take control to occupy other country using force, using army. We never thought in the 21st century we will see one big country use force, or even US use force against Iraq or Afghanistan. This can be seen as the old way of securities. Protect your own securities based on reducing other countries' securities. All right. So this type of security is focused on threat that undermine independence of the state. Vladimir Putin mentioned several times, always believed that Ukraine is part of Russia for a long, long time. It's part of independence of Russia's based on, of course, Russia positions, but not Ukraine positions. So Putin feel that his country has been divided, has been taken over. His people are in part of Ukraine, some area of Ukraine. And he feels that these people must be protected. So he believes that it is Ukraine that must be under Russia's. And Russia is being undermined their own independence. And that's why they use force. All right. Also other issues based on external factors that Ukraine would like to join NATO and other countries would like to join NATO, pressure Russia to come up with some stance, some positions. All right. So another issue is about sovereignty that come with independence, territorial, all these things you can be seen clearly based on the Ukraine-Russia crisis, or the case of Iraq and US, Kuwait, Iraq, US and Afghanistan, or even Thailand and Cambodia. You can see this kind of type, it still exists. So it is a security that priority is given to defense mechanism, mainly by military, in protecting a state sovereignty and independence of the state. Now, come to the topic of today. This is totally opposite to traditional security, because it's not focused on military. It is not focused on the state security. It is not focused on the government, but it's focused on humanities, human-centric, not state-centric, not top-down, but bottom-up approach. So mainly this one, anything that is opposite to the traditional security can be called as non-traditional securities. But to make it more clear, this type of security is not about state independence, sovereignty, territorial. Like the first type of security, it covers more schemes such as inequality, poverty, economic recessions, unemployment, resource scarcities, natural disasters, human trafficking, human rights abuse, political conflict, violence, democracy, and infectious disease, based on the idea that I do not put it here, I forgot, but very important again, and I want you to write it down, transboundary issues. Everything here is a transboundary issue, and it's connected. I will tell you a case study later. So it refers to the threat or hostile action that not only limited to the actor who is government or nation state, but also by other actors. It can be multinational corporations, it can be terrorists, it can be pirates, it can be private sectors that try to destroy, that try to plant a large scale of crops like corn in Thailand, in the northern part of Thailand, to feed the market world, to produce the food for the animals. But once you produce the corn, you burn the corn and become the haze. Upper ASEAN and Lower ASEAN has different causes that bring to the haze situations. We will discuss that later. So I just want to tell you that today's topic, it more or less linked with non-traditional security. ASEAN Way is linked with two kinds of securities. But the challenge that we will discuss part, it's more or less linked with non-traditional securities. And 3 times of seminar that we had with our friend from Bangladesh, from Bangkok, from Chiang Rai, and from Gajah Mada University as well. We talk about the ASEAN Way with Russian case. That's another thing that we also can share later as the way that Western people might also have to think about this to stop traditional security by using some idea based on ASEAN way. But today is based on ASEAN way and non-threat mainly. So in detail of human security, the last concept of human securities. This type of security is focused on human as a main priority, and it's focused on human survival and well-being as a primary concern. The main concept comes from 1994 UNDP. All right, it's not mainly focused on state securities or based on traditional securities. That state is the center of security. Human being is the center of securities. So this security is more or less in relation to non-traditional security, in which the main approach based on bottom-up approach from human to the state, or as human-centric approach, not state-centric approach that focus on top-down approach. And that's may need another sectors, private sector, human civil society sectors to help to increase human securities, but improve human securities. Yeah. So if you look from this framework, now I will elaborate more in detail. When we talk about human securities that bring threat to human or security threat, human security threat, what do we really looking into? Based on the concept of 1994 human security concept of UNDP, economic securities. I think many of you study economies, and many people, if they study some other field, they might not know why do we have to study economy or study economics, because economy is very important, because it linked with jobs, it linked with your survivals, it linked with your salaries. In SDG goals, you have decent working. In various issues, in SDG 1, they talk about poverty. In SDG 2, they talk about hunger. Same. Human security concept 1994 is the first paradigm of development of global planning to Millennium Development Goal in year 2000, from 2000 until 2015. And from 2015, the paradigm shift from Millennium Development Goals, again from UNDP, to Sustainable Development Goals that we are using right now, that every country and nation state that are member of UN are using and has to sign this with UN. All right. So we would say that development of SDG goals or MDG goals come from human securities. That's why in MDG goals or SDG goals, you will see economics perspective there a lot. Sorry, today I haven't prepared about the SDG goals, but to make you see it clear, SDG goals can separate into 5 P. The first P is about people. The second P is about prosperity, and economic security is here, and other as well. The third P is about planet. The fourth P is about peace. The last one is about partnership. All right. These are P coming from human security concept. Now we go back to economic securities. We focus on poverty, unemployment. It's a structural cause of society, of that nation state. How you can reduce the unemployment rate, how many percent you can reduce. Many countries saying that, okay, I have a poverty line better than last year based on SDG goal. So then the poverty line is, the poverty is no more the concern of that country. For example, my country, Thailand. Once they see that average of the poverty line in Thai baht currency over 60 baht per person, then my dear Prime Minister say that we don't have problem with the poverty line anymore. That's the way how we do. That's why we need to link economic security with other securities, as same as we link the prosperity first P with other P as well. Food security, you also seen this in SDG goal, Millennium Development Goals. Talk about hunger. Why? During the time in 1994, that period until 1960s, a lot of program in UN work a lot in Africa, African continent. And one of the serious issues about food, about nutrition. So food security become the first basic thing that can secure, can make people survive. So that's why it become one of the primary goals after economies, after economic securities. If you have economic, you must have good food too. Then later we come on the health securities, talk about deadly infectious disease, unsafe food, about water, access to healthcare. Again, you can see this in MDG and very clear in SDG. The fourth one is environmental securities. Again, you can see in MDG and SDG. I don't have to go in detail about this. Personal securities, talk about violence, crime, terrorism, domestic violence, child labors. This can be seen clearly in goal number 16 of SDG. Community securities, talk about inter-ethnic relations and other identity based on tensions. These also can be seen again in goal 16. The last one, political securities, talk about political repressions, human rights abuse. You can see these things, especially in my country, in Thailand right now. The youth try to say that they also have right to manage this country, not just the top down from their own government. All right. So this is mainly what I try to give the foundation before we go to the last sections of challenge of ASEAN way toward traditional threat and human insecurities. Sorry, I have how many minutes left, Professor?
Might be 10 minutes.
Okay.
Or more? Okay, yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. So before we start our discussions or these sections, this is my framework that I have come up, that non-traditional securities and human securities. Can ASEAN way handle non-traditional security and human security? That I just have laid the foundation for you. Why I do not put the word traditional security here? Because there is only two cases, I think, right now, although it's very important case. The first one, of course, is about the case in 2008 that I see it as the, traditional securities. It's just only one time that I think we have perceived that there's a traditional securities and ASEAN way could not handle. Anyone would like to say anything here before I go deeper? Okay, let me finish then. Okay, so the challenge for ASEAN way for non-traditional securities and human security, the ASEAN way has increasingly faced difficulty to maintain regional stability. Like I used to mention that it used to function well, but not anymore. It functioned well for traditional security in the last decade. And the new challenge of non-traditional threat and human insecurity is not possible. First, self-restraint principle is not effectively work well in handling dispute, conflict, and crisis. Second, non-interference principle become a deadlock to handle crisis. It is failed to prevent domestic affair or problem to be internationalized. Like I mentioned in the TAC, Treaty of Amity of Cooperation number 6, it highlights the word not to internationalize. The third one is emerging of non-traditional threat and human insecurities in globalization era, and it has become the new challenge for new ASEANs and its member to handle problem together. So failure of self-restraint principle. I try to link the case study so you can see why it failed. The first one, This can be seen through the at least two incidents as follow. In 2008, the Pravihir temple dispute, Thailand exchanging rocket fire with Cambodia. And then during Hun Sen and Aprasit Wechashiwa Prime Minister, Hun Sen tried to propose it to ASEAN. Thailand saying that it is international affairs. Thailand must accept that this is between Thailand and Cambodia. And if both parties agree, then they can resort this to ask for the High Council of ASEAN. That's why ASEAN cannot handle this issue. They bring it back to these two countries to handle. Once these two countries handle, they're exchanging rocket fires again. People kill, people will kill, people will die. Both country media dump each other and it's internationalized. Hun Sen Prime Minister decided to bring this issue to World Court, International Court of Justice in UN. And later on, UN tried to bring it back to ASEAN again, but ASEAN cannot do anything. It's go back to ICJ again. And then later on, it resolved in ICJ. So it is a failure of self-restraint and conflict management of ASEAN way when it comes to this perspective now. Second thing, the South China Sea dispute, interstate and intrastate and interstate. We can see that South China Sea become the problem, become the deadlock. Most countries cannot stop international life from China. Failure of non-interference principle. This can be seen in three cases. The insurgency in southern part of Thailand. Malaysia tried to help, Dr. Mahathir Mohamad tried to help a lot, but then Prayut Chan-o-cha, military dictatorships now become the elected prime minister, do not want anyone to interfere. Although they have the same religions in the south part of Thailand, we are the Buddhism in the central part. But if we really want to stop this, they care about state security more than human security. Currently, this situation, since 2006 until today, there were 8,000 people were killed from all sectors, private, government, military, monk, imams, they were killed in Thailand. So it's almost like a war. So when state give concern more states to state securities more than human securities, that is what happened. And once non-interference principle is working, ASEAN way is working, it stopped Malaysia to come to help as facilitators to stop 8,000 people dying. The Rohingya problem in Myanmar, political crisis in Myanmar, people want to get access to help these people. They cannot come out, people cannot get in. This is because of non-interference principle, all right? So challenge for ASEAN to cope with non-traditional threat and human insecurity. How can we do? We have to come up with a new ASEAN way of conflict management. Non-interference principle might need to be revised in some case. This can be seen through these aspects such as human rights, ethnicity and religions, the outbreak of epidemics, environment, human trafficking, terrorism, and democracy in crisis. These are things that ASEAN cannot handle with ASEAN way. Okay, so conclusions. I have a few conclusions, and this conclusion mainly coming from the publication that I have put the link already there, but mainly it's talking about ASEAN is now challenging with new security based on traditional securities, non-traditional securities, and human securities. Second one is non-traditional threat in ASEAN can be categorized in three manners. Non-traditional threat that formulate inside a nation state of ASEAN and it affects people in that nation state. Non-traditional threat that formulate inside very nation state of ASEAN and it affects the region as a whole. Non-traditional threat that formulate outside ASEAN nation state and it affects people in a nation state of ASEAN or various nation state of ASEAN. The third conclusion, human securities is insecure in these regions. Based on my publications, there are all 7 insecurities from publications and to highlight that we have all insecurity issues. So we need to put more security issues based on these 7 criteria. My 4th conclusions is that ASEAN is confronted with non-traditional threat and human insecurities. ASEAN require more collaboration with a new strategy that give ASEAN a bypass in handling these non-traditional threat and human insecurities. These new securities or strategies must contain sharpness cut through important issue or crisis in ASEAN. Crossing transboundary is seen as an important strategy that ASEAN shall be considered in managing non-traditional threat and human insecurities. The new strategy is required because the new ASEAN way, which is seen as a strategy in handling security in the past, is not working. It's blocking. I mean, the old version of the ASEAN way. So we need the new ASEAN way for non-traditional security and human rights. Inside and outside ASEAN or external parties are unable to provide help to handle non-traditional threat and human insecurities because of the non-interference principles. And my last conclusions, how to change strategy is not enough, but approach, not just only strategy, a paradigm. You must see that non-traditional threat and human security is the big issue now. It's the big problems. It's not about state-centric, but you must see the approach of human-centric from bottom up from bottom up, not from top-down approach. So far, there is no balance between these 2 approaches. How to make the balance between these 2 approaches is very important. So it is important to increase more momentum for human-centric approach to increase human security and equalize between these 2 approaches in ASEAN. So this approach must be seen as the main paradigm in transforming human insecurity into human security in ASEAN. Okay? So I think that is all of my presentation for all of you. And if you want to learn more about all what I have discussed today, you can look into on the Read ASEAN Volume 2, 2021. The theme is conflict and violence, human insecurity in ASEAN. And we have some 10 topics, interesting topic here for you to review based on 10 countries. Okay, thank you. So that would be all for my presentations.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Nichan. This is a very good and very interesting, impressive lecture for us and all the participants. We know that the ASEAN Way is based on the concept of the musyawarah, mufakat, and also unity in diversity. Then the ASEAN Way principles is aspects on the self-restraint and non-interference principle. So now we turn discussion and we have time until the 3 o'clock. Yeah. So please, you can all the participants, if you have a question, please you can write in the chat. Also can your right now. Okay. This I think is very interesting topic, yeah, and very some issues, strategic issues, yeah. Okay.
Next question, Prof.
Yes. Okay. Yes, Mr. Dimas, please. Okay.
Thank you very much, Prof, for giving me such very privileged opportunity. I'm so enjoying the presentation of Dr. Rizal, Dr.
Nichan.
Previously. Yeah. So yeah. So I have some question here that not question but need some maybe clarifications or discussion from you. The first is in terms of the G20 issues. You see that Indonesia just now was given leadership of the G20, and you see that G20 in the case of Indonesia is very important. Yeah, and Indonesia is the only one, the ASEAN countries that have opportunity to be the G20 membership. So I just want to get your views, Dr. Nichan. To what extent the G20 here that lead by Indonesia right now will share benefits to the ASEAN ways or the ASEAN member countries. And the second one is that I want to ask you about the degree of unification that ASEAN has been creating so far, because you see that we have already created ASEAN since 1967. And if we refer to the Euro unifications processes or maybe experiences, we see that Euro has already established such very higher unifications in terms of the monetary aspects. If I learn from my master degree, when I discuss about the integration of the monetary integration in the ASEAN 5 countries, I saw that there are 5 degrees of unification or 5 levels of unification that has been put forward. The first is custom, second one is trade, the third is monetary, the fourth economics, and the fifth one, the last but not least, is political unifications. So I just want to get your views. To what extent is the level of ASEAN right now? I don't see any unification that really strong in the ASEAN in terms of custom, trade, warfare, and economic, political seems to be not very clear. So I just want to get your views concerning this type of unifications. And last but not least, I eager to know, Doctor, actually, why Timor-Leste that got independent from Indonesia 20 years ago, until now, this country doesn't have any opportunity to be the membership of ASEAN. I just want to know in details what the barriers that are coming into Timor-Leste. That's all, Professor Lasio, my humble question. Thank you, Dr. Nichan.
Thank you very much. Are there any more questions for discussion for the participants? Hello?
Okay, I can answer.
Okay. Yes. Yes, please, Dr. Nichan. You can answer.
Okay, for my second. Wait a second. Okay, for the first questions about the role of Indonesia in the G20, I think as one of the biggest founding father of the region, I mean, not in terms of status, but in terms of economic powers, in terms of I would say the levels of democratizations. I think based on Indonesia's roles, and so far, I think last month Indonesia has tried so much to incorporate more in terms of economics, the global economy, more and more. Recently, I think Elon Musk, I think your president met with Elon Musk, and it showed the prestige of state. Why Thailand government could not meet Elon Musk? Why other country could not meet Elon Musk? But in the same time, Elon Musk must see something, that Indonesia is the right country to come. So we cannot separate out between economic power, political powers, the international prestige. We cannot separate that out, and it's undeniable. It's hard to say that Indonesia is not the big country. That is my first explanations why I say the biggest founding father of ASEAN need to be that. And the second thing, I think economic powers is dominant political power, obviously. Why I say like that? Because no one wants to have the World War III. We can see clearly from the case of Russian Ukraine crisis. Everybody tried to stop the war in their own way, which is totally different from the World War II and World War I. So in this case, if we think about economics, and ASEAN is the only countries, I mean, the only region that at least since the Obama administrations West look east, to shift all important resource and element to Southeast Asia, the role of middle power like South Korea or Japan or India to the greater Mekong subregions to invest more in GMS, or the idea that could not be talked about, must be talked about. It's about One Belt, One Road initiative. Economic power is the thing that connect everything together. And Indonesia, it seems to be the only stable country right now to do that. Why? As I mentioned earlier, this world is running based on economic power. Of course, there is a political power, political order, but the order is unstable. The only country in ASEAN that I see that the politics is more stable than other countries is Indonesia. Thailand is based on military coup. We have conflict. Philippines, of course, we have new, leaders that coming from the debated. This can be debated, although he might change his view already. Let's say other countries, So to answer your questions, why Indonesia? Because it's international prestige, but this international prestige is not based on political power, but it is based on economic power that can share and balance, linked to the global context situations to prove that why there is no more war. That's why political power is not working, but economic power. We have shortage of food. We have oil fluctuation price. The Ukraine is the most of number one country that export food, many things. So it seems that Indonesia roles here can play so much important thing to convince or to balance or to divert or to say that we are neutral. And why don't we use the ASEAN way or the way that ASEAN can help or divert the food production, the food shortage of the global demand to ASEANs? And why Joko Widodo can help us divine 9 other countries to take this part to help the global situations? That is my humble answer to you. And to connect with the APEC issue that will be held soon in Bangkok as well, that also is another important test for Indonesian Prime Minister, to Cambodian chair, to Thailand as the host, and to other members to make use of this timing to handle crisis with ASEAN mechanism. That is my another answer linked to the 1.1 question to 1.2 question about other country that also can take part to help. I could not remember the second questions.
Please, Mr. Can you repeat the second question?
Yeah, my second question concerning with the unification, the level of unification that ASEAN right now has, Doctor.
Okay, my opinion, I think if you compare 1957 and 1967, 10-year difference of the 5 level of unification, if I'm not mistaken, based, I think you are from economics, so you have this kind of methods. Right now, I think we can just, what we claim to have is just level 3, right? After we have FTA, free trade agreements, but we cannot go to have our same law or supra organizations. And that's the first thing that I want to clarify, that we have tried to go to that part, but not supra organization based on, as I mentioned in the beginning, that the foundations of building ASEAN is this not based on legal binding organizations, right? Why? Because I think we have our own way that we come up to settle. It's a good timing to settle our own dispute, and in the same time to stop other people dispute us. So I think the originations of foundations is different. So I think that is the important reason why we cannot step up, and Asian value and Western value is different. And I don't see that we really want to go to the level 5. That is the position of every nation state. We just want to maintain to be like this. But in my opinion, I don't think that the fastest is need to be fast. But fastest also can be slow. I mean, if we slow, it doesn't mean that we really slow, because we have our own position very clear that what we want these organizations to be. But once the young generation has stepped up to be in ASEAN, one day they will be a leader. And today, ASEAN do not give importance to young generations. Not only young generations, ASEAN claim to talk a lot about citizenship, but currently it's about the government and government, 230 meetings per year. But there's no civil society involved. There is no, student university from Malaysia, from Thailand meeting up. That is the real thing that I think we can make it faster and progress more than EU. EU, how they do, they don't have to do the ASCC, ASEAN Social Cultural Community. They don't have to do that. Why? Because they speak the same language. They can speak 5 languages. They also share the same religions. They also connected to each other very easily. But comparing to us, mainland, sea, religions, language, that's why Surin Pitsuwan, my beloved permanent secretary who just passed away, mentioned that the difference is challenge. It's not an obstacle, but it's challenge. But only thing that miss in ASEAN is communications. We do not communicate more. So from my opinion, I don't think we can go through the supra organizations or the regional organization level 5. We will have only 3 levels. And I think since 1991 that we start to do the FTA, single country with other multilateral or bilateral, we also disrespect ASEAN member state as well. We follow the WTO, signing itself. We do not use ASEAN as we want to use, and ASEAN used to be as regional organization, regional collective ideas. Yeah, so that's my answer.
Okay, thank you very much. We still have 5 minutes. That there is a question from Mrs. Nichan in the chat. The first question is I said about the case of terrorism. What is the opinion of Dr. Nichan related to the political security in ASEAN? And the second question is, what do you think, Dr. Nichan, about the existence of community of asylum seekers from various countries, Pakistan, for example, which until now there is still no solution? Thanks. Yeah.
Sorry, I could not hear it clear, but I know the first question is about the terrorism in ASEAN and how to handle it, something like that.
Yeah, I think that.
And how about the second?
And what your opinion is about the terrorism in ASEAN?
In my opinion, I remember the position of ASEAN and Southeast Asia changed during the time on the case of 9/11. And in that time, the US, George W. Bush, tried to ask the consensus from every nation state in the world that if you do not select to be part with the US, you have to be part with the other terrorists. And I think in that time, ASEAN positions and many countries in Southeast Asia agree that we are not agree with the US to be with the US, but we agree with the principle that US put in the declarations or so on, that if there is any kind of threat that might happen to the US might use their own defense to stop. And that also part of this declarations, also part of that. So I think once they have a 9/11 and then the idea of terrorism spread and it's connected to religion issues, especially in Thailand. In Thailand, I cannot speak on behalf of all country in nation state of ASEAN, but for Thailand, in deep south of Thailand, in that time, there's 2 streams of belief, 2 positions of fractions. The first factions They just want to, they don't want to have independence. They just want to have autonomy. They still want to be part of Thailand. So in that time, of course, the Siamese, the assimilation policies going down, the problems stream up. The problems stream up to change the idea from to have autonomy, to become independence more and more after the case of 911, after the Al-Qaeda, after that, Bin Laden, it make up a network of terrorism and it linked to Southeast Asia. And then later on, the Chinese government, the situation in Thailand based on Uyghur, all this stuff stream the situation of terrorism that very important to ASEAN. But of course, I think this need a new ASEAN way that I mentioned already, that you cannot rely on only one single country to handle this. For example, when you have tsunami, you set up a tsunami center to help each other, the disaster center. Or recently, once Thailand is part of, was the chair of ASEAN 2 years ago, they set up something about the decorations of plastic in the sea or something like that, and joint hands, or the idea of defense diplomacy. When they have disaster together, the military help each other. I think this can be seen as the new perspective of ASEAN based on new ASEAN way of conflict management, that we can join hand and interfere each other when it comes to same issue of terrorism. Yes, that's my first answer.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Nichan. Unfortunately, the time is up, and we are just very thank you very much. You give enlightenment to our colleagues in Indonesia, particularly in the University of Muhammadiyah Jakarta, and hopefully we can continue our cooperation between each other, not only for lecture, but maybe we're working together on visiting each other after this pandemic COVID-19, and also exchange our students as well to your university. Please give applause to the Dr. Nichan. Thank you very much. And
thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, Ken, now the time is up, so we can finish our meeting now. Alhamdulillahirrahmanirrahim. And maybe are there more speaks from the gentleman, Mr. Dimas?
I just want to thank Dr. Nichan for your very enlightening presentations. I got many new information and knowledge from you, and the way how you pronounce the presentation is energetic. Yeah, so we can focus on your presentations and also the content. So hopefully, one day we can meet each other physically, and please inform us if you are visiting Yogyakarta, in particular University Muhammadiyah. So hopefully we can get in touch and good details about the collaborations potentially, and hopefully one day also we could visit your university or your country, so we can exchange our ideas and others. Thank you very much, Dr. Nichan again. Dr. Prof. Nasir, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Nichan and all of participants this event this afternoon. So hopefully now have a nice weekend, and we can meet later in the different time. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Terima kasih, Prof.
Sama-sama semuanya.
Terima kasih teman-teman semua.
Ya, udah dari 100-an termasuk. Ini saya melibatkan yang reguler juga, kami ada yang reguler biar tahu kalau. Terima kasih Pak Dimas, nanti kita ketemu lagi.